Good evening, I'm Michael Sharp and this is Focus 5. My guest for the next half hour will be Brandon's most honored citizen. And to list just a few of his countless awards: Order of Canada, Officer Brother of the Order of St. John, soon to be invested with the commander of that same order, Efficiency Decoration from the Canadian Forces, the Canadian Decoration from same, 50 years as a commissioned officer in the regular and militia armed forces. A number of other service decorations: Legion of Meritorious Service Medal, the Order of the Buffalo, Citizen of the Year Award from the province of Manitoba, numerous life memberships, about 40 in all, Honorary Colonel of the 26th Field Regiment here in Brandon, and an 8-year service record on City Council.
This is Focus 5, a production of CKX Television News, with your host, Michael Sharp.
If you've been in western Manitoba for more than 5 minutes, you know, of course, I'm referring to Steve Magnacca. And Steve, we've listed just a few of your many honors and awards. What are some of the things that stand out in your mind about these many honors that you've received?
Well, I would say that the Honor of Canada presented to me reflects not only to me personally, but it reflects to the whole of western Manitoba, because it's the first time an honor's come this way. I don't consider honors to be a personal one. Possibly we might say they pick on someone who is known in the community, but it really represents the community.
Now, 8 years on council, of course, all 8 years as mayor. You retired undefeated. And in those 8 years as mayor, you gathered quite a collection of memorabilia. The walls of your den are just covered with it, bookcases in your den, filing cabinets all over. What are some of these things that you are particularly proud of?
Well, it's pretty hard to describe in a few seconds, but really the things I've received, they're mementos of personal nature. All city mementos, of course, are at the City Hall or in storage, I don't know which. But I can only put up what I can. The rest have to still go in boxes in my home or up in storage shelves.
Well, you're a man of many hats. You've been honored by the military, you've been honored by the political world, you've been honored by the community at large, and of course you're quotation marks retired now, but that's not really the case, is it?
No, no. I have some 40, 50 hats of various types, and if I only wore the hats each day, I'd be busy.
All right, you know, your interests now that you're retired, that are still keeping you busy, the St. John ambulance, historical things? Yes,
and it seems that St. John has had its problems because of accommodation. I think the city has finally agreed to give us some accommodation, but really we were hoping that we could have built, but we're prepared to wait since the city is going to be kind enough to allow us space in one of their buildings. Historical Society, I'm most anxious to see a museum and a research center established for Brandon, but that seems very difficult at this time. More or less, we seem to be in a hurry to tear down and build up.
And on the military side, you're still active with the 26th Field?
I'm still the Honorary Colonel of the 26th Field Regiment, and I'm on a yearly appointment, and I just received news that I'm on for another year from October.
Mm-hmm. Now, you still get people coming up to you asking for advice and assistance, even though you're retired from City Hall?
Oh, yes. Well, some people get to know an individual, whoever he may be, and their line of sight is on that one person. So they think that you can solve all the problems, whether you're mayor or not. And I get quite a few, and I do try and help them out if it's within my possibilities.
All right, if there's one man that has the background and the material to talk about the history of Brandon, I would suspect that you're that man. And we'll take a brief look at the background and the history of Brandon in the next portion of our program right after this message. As I mentioned, our guest is Brandon's most honored citizen, Steve Magnacca, and in your basement collection you have a mini museum in itself. Some of the articles down there, which are far too numerous to mention, but actually provide a civic history of the city of Brandon. What are some of the things that you treasure most in that collection?
Well, there are many things, Mike. There's my collection of scissors over the period of 8 years. There are many varied types of scissors that I have promised time and again that I would give to a city museum, in particular if it's a municipal museum, the municipal hall.
Now these scissors are, many of them engraved. These are the ones that you use to cut ribbons to open?
Yes, many of them are engraved. Many of them are in sets of letter openers, magnifying glasses, and different types of scissors. Many scissors are just ordinary common scissors. But the fact remains that the ribbons and the scissors are still there, and there's a need for a place for them.
You have quite a collection of other things that really are students' delight in the, such as old pictures of the city of Brandon.
Oh yes. My home is used often by professors, students, school teachers, citizens at large on any particular subject, and I'm usually able to provide the research material for them, and I do that.
We don't have a museum, either an historical museum or one on the civic history of Brandon. These are both things that you've been working for. Are you hopeful that we'll get something along that line?
Yes, I do, but I'm mindful that we have the Hills Museum, which is strictly an animal museum, and we have the old fort up on the hill, but I'm talking about a museum for artifacts, a museum of historical nature, the city itself and the city as a whole, which we haven't got.
Something else we haven't got are some of the picturesque old buildings, such as the old City Hall building, and you've provided us with some pictures of some of these old buildings. You at one time had hoped that this building we see now had that they could preserve part of it for historical purposes.
Well, it was requested that the front part of the City Hall was built in 2 or 3 parts in the old days, but the front part was hoped that it would be reserved for a museum because of its historical front. And I remember Mr. Bill Storty, who's now retired at the coast, was most anxious that we preserve the front of the City Hall with its high tower, but that apparently couldn't be done.
And there are several other buildings that you've brought pictures along. There's some of them that are still there. This is rather an interesting shot. I believe that's Rosser Avenue in the early days of Brandon.
Yes, yes, and you look at the roads, why, not too good. And the face of Rosser Avenue, evidently, you can see that it has changed considerably. Many new buildings, and some of the old ones are still there. I feel that somewhere along the line we've got to reserve 1 or 2 of these old buildings for posterity and for a museum.
One of the buildings that we still have with us is Park School, and it's rather interesting that when this picture was taken, it said West End Brandon. That was the West End.
Well, yes, the West End Brandon has changed in recent years, and we're much further west by a long ways. Park School in itself is a historical building, and we applied to the school board for this building, but of course it's rather early because they haven't constructed their new one. But we're hoping that some consideration will be given to that building as a museum. for the city of Brandon.
It would be large enough that you could combine both museums that you've been talking about, would it not?
Right, and we would liberalize the idea of it by allowing other groups to come in and use the school too, if it was permissible.
Have you had an indication from the school board whether they're susceptible to this
Well, it
idea?
was under consideration. Now they want us to wait till they're going to use it, because they may use it in the meantime.
While the new one's being built. Something else that we've lost some rather picturesque churches, although there are still some around. Was there ever any attempt made to save some of the older churches that were...
Unfortunately, the church was sold, and it seems these days it's all a matter of money when it comes to historical events. And the church that was sold at the corner of Lauren and 8th, just sold, disappeared.
You're not suggesting, though, that we keep all our old buildings?
Oh, of course not. No, but I think it's high time that we thought of the odd old house, such as Senator Coffer's or other similar types, the old Mayor Fleming's home, the odd commercial building which would make a good museum. But the building itself has to have some significance for the purpose of a museum or a research center or something like that. Otherwise, there's no use. I have no idea of withholding the tearing down of buildings for progress. That must go on.
Such as the old YMCA building, that was one that made way for progress.
Yeah, it had to go. And it had had its day. And it really wasn't such an historical building.
But Rosser Avenue, as you say, the face of Rosser Avenue has really changed over the
tremendously.
years.
Tremendously.
The street is wider. Most of the old buildings are gone on Rosser Avenue now, and though there's still the odd one that's still there.
Well, some would like to see stay for good, but how are you going to do that? I'm thinking of Mutter's little store. It's an historical place.
In itself, it is.
In itself.
And it also has the historical atmosphere, which...
Oh, typical. And it's wonderful, and it's still one of the most well-patronized stores in the city for that purpose. But there are other buildings, and of course, I'm looking at the logical side too. You can't very well reserve buildings on Rosser Avenue alone, unless they're at the ends of Rosser or the ends of Princess.
Well, 10th and Rosser is a classic example. That's our most modern corner now with the Scotia Towers. But at one time there was the bank, and what was that other building at the corner of 10th and Rosser?
Oh, a bank, the old Bank of Commerce building. Oh, we've had many banks and many changes of banks over the years.
But that corner in itself is an example of making way for progress.
Well, I think that was understood. You couldn't withhold a project such as the Scotia Towers by saving one building. But I am annoyed, Mike, when you see buildings like the old post office torn down, and the replica on the top of that building was the only one that had the Queen Victoria coat of arms. Now that's disappeared, and nobody seems to know where it's gone, and that was a museum piece, and I thought that building might have been reserved. But the government, federal government, isn't much smarter than the rest of the governments. They decided to sell it, and they sold to a low bidder, and the bid wasn't very great, which would have been well worthwhile for Brandon. But there were people that were against it for the use of a museum. Others were all for it. But it would have been an ideal building, and in itself a museum piece.
Now, during your years with the civic administration, and prior to that, you were responsible for building up part of the west end of Brandon. You developed houses.
That's right. In 1949, I was chairman of the Veterans Housing Committee, and I went to City Hall to seek further wartime and peacetime housing. And one of the aldermen said, if you're so smart, why don't you build them yourself? And of course, nothing triggers me quick than being threatened, so I went into the construction business, and I built most of what is known as Waverly Heights. in which no one would have dreamt that as you look west on Victoria Avenue to see it today, it's unbelievable.
About 600 houses in all.
Oh, approximately 600 houses, plus a great many buildings and other things of the past.
Okay, we've been dealing with the past up till now. We'll take a short break and we'll come back and we'll talk about the future of Brandon as you see it and what we need and what should be done.
Fine, Mike.
We've touched briefly on the history of Brandon, some of the background. Now for a look at the future, and one of the things that in the past and in the future you've mentioned many times that you feel is important to the growth and success of the city of Brandon are the municipalities and towns in the surrounding area.
Well, Mike, no one need to tell me that we are an island to ourselves. We're very much dependent, as this station is, on the surrounding area and our trading population. And consequently, I'm a great believer that we must be on the best of terms with all the communities of the surrounding area. Town reeves, mayors, and so on are vital, and the merchants, because we are dependent upon them. And they, in many ways, are dependent upon us. And it's vital that we remain a solid block in the western part of the province so that we can carry out our work and do our job when we make our demands upon the provincial and federal government. And none of us can do that as individuals, but collectively we can do much.
Do you feel these relations are good at the present time?
Well, I find they're fairly good. As I go around the country, I'm received well, but then I can only speak for myself. There's some rumors are that they are not as good as they were, but the cycle of times take care of that.
Mm-hmm. We're going to have a new mayor next month. What are the biggest challenges that will face him or her?
Well, I think it's one of the most challenging times of our time, because the transition period isn't quite over as far as the boundaries are concerned. We still have the ward problems that most people don't like. As a matter of fact, it's disliked because we're now boiling down to little pots here and there instead of one city. And then you have the fact that the provincial government is dictating to the city the terms of service, for instance, 3 years for mayor and alderman. And most people think that's too long. The city is losing much of its own freedom. As a matter of fact, the people, the taxpayers, are seldom consulted nowadays. If you'll take a look back in our history, the city manager bylaw was by the people. It was done away not by the people now. It's been done away by a handful of people in City Hall and with the consent of the government. I think that we've got to get back to where the people's thoughts and wishes should be respected.
They seem to be losing interest.
Right.
Look at our upcoming election. We've got some seats that could go begging for candidates. They are at the present time. We could have many acclamations, which is an unhealthy sign. The people are losing interest. The candidates are losing interest.
Well, I don't know the cause of it, but I do know this, that the aldermen are supposed to have less and less to do, but they claim now they haven't got the time to do it. What the problem is, I don't know, but I think that we should revert back to our old system of government, and I'm all for a city manager.
You think that this was a mistake to eliminate the position as city manager as opposed to the present system then of the committee of three, the clerk, the treasurer, and the engineer?
Well, they're all fine men, but they're prominent in their own jobs as it is. They've got more than they can handle. This other job was a coordinating job or a reporting job to council. Well, City manager used to be able to do that. Now there is no city manager, so these people have to do a dual job in order to satisfy those that want this sort of system.
The indication was, though, that it was rather efficient, because in the last budget year they actually came up with a surplus on the city budget, which hasn't happened for many years and didn't happen under a city manager.
Well, if it was a surplus, I don't know where the surplus went, but I don't want to get into politics, Mike. I think there's enough problems. There's going to be enough problems. I do hope, though, Mike, and this is important, that the city citizens waken up and realize that October will soon be here, and there's no committees, there's no ward groups, no overall group to beckon good candidates for those offices. And I think that's vitally important. It could be said immediately, well, Mr. Magnacca, you as a former mayor, what are you doing about it? Well, I've reached the age where I'm pretty busy and I haven't been too well to go into that sort of thing, but I'd certainly lend my support. But I think we need public opinion as never before in order to work out a good scheme of civic government.
Some people might say the fact that the people are apathetic towards City Hall would indicate that they're satisfied.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. Beware of quietness. Beware of quietness.
We've had some pretty big upsets after quiet elections, that's true.
Oh, yes.
Well, what's the answer then? How do you get people interested? Who has to do this?
Well, I would think it'd be a good idea if each ward had a ward committee and then an overall committee and have public meetings. There are many things they can question the candidates about. One is the very thing we're talking about today. Mr. Candidate, are you in favor of a museum? If not, why not? Are you in favor of this and that and the other thing? Are you in favor of city manager form of government? Are you in favor of the ward system as is, or would you like to see it be reverted? And I think these opinions are best expressed by the people themselves and not one or two people after an election.
Another thing that's been talked about a great deal is growth for Brandon. Do we want growth as fast as we can get it for the sake of growth, or do we want to control it and keep some of the character of our community?
I think we want to keep the character of our community, and we should plan and control our future, because it'd be wrong for Brandon to become a metropolis similar to Winnipeg. We have no interest in that. If they're having their problems, at least we don't have the criminal problem here that they have in Winnipeg. And I think a population, the experts in my time were telling us that our city shouldn't go beyond 80,000 people. And that would give the other communities a chance to grow around us if they wanted to grow, and I'm sure they do.
Do you still think that's a valid plan for the future?
Oh, I do, because you see, growth has to go hand in hand with many other things, such as sewer and water, streets and roads. It costs money to grow, and there should be a limit to where people know that that's their level.
All right, we have just a few seconds left. What do you see for the future of Brandon? Good, bad, or indifferent?
Oh, I think the future is wonderful. I think it's excellent. It's going to be good. I think we're going to grow. It's a wonderful place to live. We're known throughout the continent that when you come to Brandon, you're well greeted and you're made to feel happy to be here.
Thank you very much. My guest on Focus 5 has been Steve Magnacca, Colonel Magnacca, Mayor Magnacca, and Mr. Citizen Magnacca. That's it on Focus 5.